Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Reinsurance Podcast. I'm your co-host, Jared Lee.
And you also have Ben Rose here, but I'm not alone today on this side of the table.
We are not. You have Ryan Hewlett, a journalist, deputy news editor, titles galore at the Insurer. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to be here, and also I'm joining quite an esteemed list of guests that you've had on the past.
Well, thank you.
So I feel quite privileged. Also, it's a little bit strange being on this side of the table. I typically spend most of my days doing the interviewing, not being the interviewee. So it's exciting.
You get used to straddling both sides. Ben and I are enough conversations where we're on both the other side as well. So, but welcome. We always start off with our guests of like your journey into reinsurance. I can only imagine as an aspiring journalist, you're looking at the universe of things you want to talk about and going, you know where my heart lies?
Oh yeah,
reinsurance.
Oh yeah.
No, but how did you get into this space? How did you start picking up this side of the industry?
So I think there's never, being a journalist, you think you want to break sort of the Watergate scandal, right? You think that's the, you want to win the Pulitzer Prize, okay?
You thought insurance was going to be a scandalous topic area.
No, well, I mean, I'm going to answer that with a yes.
But not miles off. Yeah.
But no, so I think that sort of, as a journalist, that's what you want to do. It's a tough industry to crack, journalism. It's sort of, you work for a long time for free to get the first gig, right? And I got offered an opportunity very early on to join another publication, and sort of try and spearhead their re-entry into sort of the specialty London market coverage. Yeah. And I remember my first week, I was very privileged. I was allowed to spend a week on the box in Lloyd's. Oh, nice. And in that week, I met an underwriter who specialises in spacecraft, right, and satellites. And I thought, oh my word, up to that point it'd been general insurance, right? I was very young. All I had done was, sort of buy car and home insurance. Yeah. I thought it was quite frankly, the dullest thing in the world. Yeah. But that really opened my eyes. That's really how I sort of started writing about the specialty insurance markets.
Yeah, excellent. And sort of when you start looking for stories now, you're a bit more seasoned. You obviously had started building your career in this space. What are things that excite you? Obviously, London-based, so you're sort of around that buzz of the London market. We've just done a podcast talking about that in depth. What are the things that you go, oh, this is something that will resonate? Here's a thing that's like worth diving into.
So I think, firstly, the insurance market loves news, okay? It loves data, all right? And it wants information almost more than I think any other financial services industry. And it's got a really long background in that, by the way. I mean, if you think back to sort of Edward Lloyd and sort of, the Lloyd's coffee shop and so on, that started off really as entrepreneurs, putting out information. And so that trend has carried on going. It's also an incredibly dynamic market. So there's news everywhere. And that sounds a bit cliche, but I'm afraid it's completely true. There is news everywhere, and you don't actually have to work too hard to find it. So, for example, being in we're based in sort of EC3 as a business, right, sort of in the heart of insurance, London, opposite Lloyd's, surrounded by the brokers. And, I think the specialty market just tends to lend itself to offering huge amounts of news. And it's because it touches everything. So almost every day you could pick up a national newspaper and you can see whatever's the headline on the newspaper is that day, there's almost certainly an insurance angle, a reinsurance angle. And I think that's been the case forever. And, as whether it's a political change, whether it's a social change, insurance coverage backs basically everything. So as a result, you can pick up news pretty darn fast.
Yeah. How do you balance? Because that's super interesting point, right? So you've got everything that happens in the world is interesting to insurance people because we're insuring everything in the world. Well, in theory,
quite.
But I find a lot of news content within the trade press, within the industry, is also quite industry focused in terms of, like people who are moving around, or things that have happened to insurance companies? How do you draw the lines between, or divide time between, like stuff that's out there that's relevant to the people in here versus interesting stuff that's happening in here? If that makes sense.
No, totally. I mean, I think it's really important to remember, and it's something that I talk to the team a lot about, is remembering who our audience is. Right, our audience are the experts.
Yep.
They are the guys and the girls who know everything there is to know on this subject. Okay, and they're market leaders in these subjects. So our job isn't to sort of tell them what to do, and it certainly isn't to tell them what they already know. The job is really to sort of poke away at the things which perhaps they haven't wrestled with, question why they haven't wrestled with it yet. So sort of to answer your question as to how we manage that balance, I think we have a good understanding of what the market is doing and isn't doing. So for example, you take climate change is a great example of this. We know the industry efforts, we know what individual firms are doing, so we're not necessarily going to comment on every single time a regulator puts something out on climate change. However, we are going to look very deeply at the analysis. We're going to look very deeply at companies' results to see how perhaps climate pledges, to see how climate change is a risk, how these things are impacting firms on a wider market level. Because that's the analysis that our readers really want. They want sort of the wider view as well as sort of the deep dive analysis stuff.
Well, that's an interesting. That one feels like it's still breaking a little bit with the sort of NZIA. All it was unraveling. This is sort of news over the last month and a bit, but sort of what that means to the industry, the impact of the industry, what it means going forward, what does it mean against companies' ambition, what's driving it, the sort of U.S. regulatory environment, tons of components that are sort of driving something that the industry sort of collectively kind of backed, that's now beginning to sort of erode in many ways.
I think I think that's a really interesting point, and the question I think is it eroding? I think there's being a part of a body, the NZIA, is obviously it's a wonderful way of, it's got wonderful convening power, right? That's why these groups often can be so successful. But these firms, the firms who were involved in this, haven't backed away from their pledges. They still have they have legal regulatory requirements for net zero in a relatively short space of time. So I think it's the industry can't get away from it. It's going to have to deal with it. And I think it's the, without sort of getting too many specifics, the sort of the US lobby political lobby is a tough nut to crack, right? And it's like this, and climate change, particularly in the US, is still a pretty touchy subject. But the insurers have got a vested interest in sorting this out, and I think regulators and so on understand that.
Absolutely. I guess that's maybe another interesting thing to think about for our listeners when you're looking at this role of journalists within insurance and reinsurance versus journalists in general. When I do a caricature in my head of like what newspapers are for, and what they're trying to do, why they exist. Sometimes you get this feeling of like, oh, they are there to uncover a great scandal, or to like make known things that ought to be known, to fill in gaps where people have questions. You get others that maybe have a bit more of like a political leaning, or want to help further a general view of the world, almost like pamphleting in some ways. How does that change in terms of just like in your editorial capacity? How do you steer and maybe not even specific to insurance and reinsurance, but as a trade press type firm, how does one think about what is our purpose here? I guess you're a company that wants to make money, on one hand, but are you also there to be the voice of the market, or what's the sort of?
I think we see ourselves as an advocate for the industry, and I think that's I think we can play, and we do play. I want to stress that. I think we do play very successfully an important role in our own ability to convene and bring ideas together, and also it's despite talk about companies not wishing to work in sort of individually and work in silos and so on, naturally they do. And we have a sort of a role to play in sort of bringing ideas and bringing concepts together and sort of throwing it out to the market and saying, what do you think of that? These are what your competitors are doing. What do you think about that? It's I think fundamentally we see ourselves as an advocate.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a delicate balance at times, but also challenging the industry where it needs to be challenged, right? Raising the flag on, like, should we be insuring coal and these sorts of things, pressing issues on, gender pay gaps and those types of issues that in the London market are certainly newsworthy as we try to do things better and modernize in those areas. So it's one of these really interesting dynamics where you're writing to that audience of experts who sit in this space, in many ways challenging what they're doing, but in an environment where they're also like addicted to knowing what everyone else is doing in the buzz of the space, right? So it's a really interesting blend of the audience you're writing to and about at the same time.
Agreed. I think what's really interesting is, is sometimes when you sort of deep dive into a subject. So, for example, you just mentioned gender pay gap reporting and so on. Some firms report, some don't. It can be quite murky to try and uncover just exactly some firms are doing, and our job is often to kind of try and see through that. Really try and uncover what's really behind the numbers, right? And create a narrative out of that, and then put that back and go, oi. What's going on there? Or sometimes on the flip side, why aren't you reporting? Because it says on your website that you're, pro this and you're pro that. So where are the numbers? Show them to us. Because if you're public about it in your marketing, you should be public about it in your reporting. And that's it's not always a popular thing, but I think it's a very important part of our role. And I think it's a role that we will continue to play. And I think there's an element where sometimes the reporting that we do is not necessarily, we don't want, it's not supposed to be popular, but we're not trying to sort of share the same view time and time again. We're trying to challenge, because that's where we get the best responses from.
I suppose that's part of the quid pro quo of advocacy as well, right? You've got to be able to advocate for people that you trust, to be accountable as well in their own operations, in the way they run their businesses. Agreed.
And the same can be said for many things. Climate change reporting, we've mentioned that already. It could be, and then also the financial reporting. That's a major part of our role, right? And it's so much more than just look how much money this firm made. Look at the combined ratio of this reinsurer, this carrier. It's so much more than that. It's actually, really analysing what are the trends here. And I think that's what the market values.
Yeah. Definitely. Well, and it's that comparison across various firms or building peer groups up and sort of showing those sorts of insights. Because, as you said, like it gives the industry kind of the information, the insights that they care about and that they want, without making us all independently go and pull the annual reports. But I know that we always look forward to sort of the time of year when all the annual results will come out, and we sort of dive into them and we begin to unpack those. But the news cycle around that is always really, really interesting, because you have those comparisons that begin to emerge, who performed really, really well and who's sort of underperforming massively, and what does that begin to mean. Then you always get like big news story breaks, right? Companies trying to sell off an entity, which you're seeing in today's news. You're seeing massive mergers, you're seeing talent movement, which again is very much a thing, especially in the London market.
Absolutely.
So there's as you said, there's stuff happening all the time, which makes it super vibrant.
It's I think it's a deeply competitive market, right?
Yeah.
And we talk an awful lot about collaboration. We talk an awful lot about the idea of a syndicate, right? The idea of pooling risk. But fundamentally, it's a deeply competitive market, and therefore, we as in the market are going to fight hard to attain and retain talent. And for journalists like myself, it's an ever ongoing flow of news on that front, and it's very exciting.
I'd love to. There's loads of things I'd love to unpick there. I wanted to ask you specifically, I guess, with you guys living in a parallel world almost to our own industry, because journalism is very competitive as well. Talent moves around, all sorts of similar things. I wanted to ask in particular about over perhaps a longer time scale, how you've seen, on one hand, technology being grappled with by the insurance and reinsurance markets, but actually at the same time going through your own technological transition, right? Because it's the same user group at the end of the day. You've got underwriters who simultaneously are trying to work out how to use, online systems for their work, but also transitioning to online sources for their news and so on. How has that changed your business as journalists?
I think, well, I'm a breaking news journalist, right? And I think for people like me who love getting the scoop, and that's what we do at the Insurer, online journalism is the best, okay? And it means we can get the news, we can fire it into your inbox, before anyone's had a chance to blink, right?
Yeah.
And that for us really, really matters. And more importantly, it matters for our readers because that's what they want. That's why they're subscribers. They want the news first. And that's, that can't be done, I'm afraid, if you're waiting on a daily, a weekly, a monthly, or whatever. It simply doesn't work like that. I mean, there's a place for it completely. I mean, there's completely a place for it. I mean, I think some people love the idea of sitting back and reading a 1,000, 2,000 word analysis piece on the train in the morning. But, I think fundamentally we live in a digital world. And just as the underwriters are grappling with platforms like yours, they're also having to understand that's how we operate as well.
Yeah. Well, and Ben and I, and I'm sure you as well, will are enough WhatsApp groups and Slack channels in the industry where all of a sudden something is broken and everyone's scrambling to figure out, like, wait, what? And everyone's scrambling to find the thing, because there is this sense of at any one point someone has just gotten a ting on their phone and they don't know a thing, and their curiosity's been piqued and they're sort of in a zone trying to understand what's going on. And everyone around us, again, because it's this sort of finite, sort of confined little universe we exist in, everyone is like, what's the thing that's happening, right? And there's this buzz of immediacy, which is always exciting.
I mean, something not to sort of plug myself, but something super cool recently, sitting on the back row of a conference. We pushed out, I mean, I was actually in the conference, but as the team pushed out a news alert, right? And I watched the person in front of me get the bing, right? And they opened it, the email came up, and they nudged the person next to me. They went on the app and found it on the app, And you go, see, that's it working, right? Yeah. It's good, it's cool stuff, You like to know that people are reading what you're writing.
And you got that, I guess, plus as well now, things like, well, I mean, we're moving beyond written content as well in some areas, which is cool and exciting.
Yeah. Hey, I mean, like, both of you guys are on the Insurer TV, right? And actually, I think, well, I hope you guys found it very, very valuable. I mean, we certainly did, and I know our audience did. But actually, people consume media in different ways, and I'm sure you guys certainly do. I mean, in your own sort of news consumption. So why shouldn't we do that in the insurance market as well? Yeah. And also, it gives our subscribers not only another platform from which to sort of gain the information, but also they can utilize it themselves, like as you guys did, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, for me, I watch a lot of the Insurer TV videos. I'm sure, like
pleased to hear it.
Like many of our listeners do as well. But for me, it certainly adds a depth of personality and also realism to what can sometimes feel a bit overly curated in the written versions. You get, has it been through marketing? Has it been through PR? Is that the press release statement that we want to say? Whereas when you can watch somebody be asked a question live and see how they respond and see what their face does whilst they say it, not in a way to entrap them, because you don't go and say, like, tell us about this scandal, but rather to see.
We do try.
But you say, how do you think the market is going right now? How are cedents coping with it being much harder to buy reinsurance than it was? Watching somebody's thoughtful reaction and comment on that, rather than some generic comment that's been approved to the point where it doesn't mean anything, is so valuable.
Also, I think it's a market of really strong personalities, right? Despite huge efforts and huge success in sort of e-trading and platforms, so on, really big complex risks still are done face to face, right? Yeah. And the industry relies very heavily on its personalities, and sometimes I think we forget
Yeah.
You've got some really cool people
Yeah.
in the industry, and actually you want to push them forward. You want to hear from them because these people are sort of making big changes, or they're real leaders in the market, and their views should come across, right?
Definitely.
Yeah, it's certainly an eclectic space.
Yeah.
Getting a chance to have those one-on-one conversations, getting to know people, like it makes it fun, right? And do you do then like the Monte Carlo conferences and the Baden-Baden conferences? You're sort of in the sort of the grind of these events as well.
Hey, I mean, we're already well and truly ingrained in the prep for Monte Carlo. I mean, it's a huge time for us.
Yeah.
And it's a big time for the market, right? I mean, the whole point of Monte Carlo is you've got these execs in rooms discussing what's going to happen at 1/1, and our job is to uncover what's going on inside those rooms, right?
Yeah.
And to ensure that message is out there.
Yeah.
It's a really key part of our year. It's a very busy time of our year.
Yeah.
And that is an example where we still do dailies, right? We still have print publications there.
Yeah.
I think
So I mean, I think as it goes back to an earlier question, it shows there's still room for everything, right?
Yeah.
But also it shows how strong demand is for information. That's something like the Rendezvous or Baden-Baden, or the fact that people still require and want a physical publication to read in these things really highlights the need for information.
Pick it up every day.
Hey.
Know it well. We talk a lot about on this podcast sort of innovation in the space and how we're driving technology. You mentioned trading platforms as well. What are you seeing sort of the role of the newest sort of emerging sort of tech in space, but AI, ChatGPT in sort of the journalistic space? Is it you're putting out tons more content and most of this is written by the computer now, or how are you guys engaging with it or not engaging with it? What does that begin to look like
so
for a journalist?
Personally, on a purely personal level, I love this stuff. I think it's awesome, but it has its limits currently, and you can totally see a future where a lot of the work, sort of the press release work, I mean, that can just be done in seconds by a sort of an AI. But like I said, it has its limitations. And for example, now, I mean, you take the sort of the standard free version of ChatGPT or whatever. I think it only goes back to sort of 2021. I think in terms of sort of historical data, which if you're writing about breaking live news, is not very helpful.
Yeah.
However, you take things like you see something in a press release which you don't understand. Okay, it's an industry which likes to use complex language for absolutely no reason.
It's the reason our podcast exists.
Right. No. Right. Exactly. And so you can type that in.
Yeah.
You can type in. So what exactly is a reinsurance? What's reinsurance treaty? What does that mean?
Yeah.
How is that different from anything else? What is that? And ChatGPT will give you an answer, and it's, I'm afraid, a very good answer. So it has its most of the time. Well,
I would say, I would say a very convincing answer, which is interesting.
Well, hey, look, I'm a journalist. You've got to check it, triple check your sources, right? I mean,
we had a lot of fun. We did a hackathon internally.
Oh, cool!
To play with the constraints of ChatGPT and to see where it could be useful. And I can't remember. There's some special terms. Walled garden, I think, is one or something.
Okay.
Where you have to think about how you set the constraints for your queries that you ask ChatGPT to make sure that it only uses the truth as its source, and all this sort of thing. And because of that, if you get it right or you get it wrong, you can find yourself dealing with more or less of a hallucinatory version of ChatGPT. So if you say like, only use stuff that you know to be true, don't invent anything type language as part of your request, then if you ask it, like, what is a top and drop reinsurance contract? It will say, I don't know. If you say, try and answer even if you don't know, on the other hand, it will just make it up. It will come up with some very convincing sounding version of the truth. So as you said, it's really useful if it knows. Most terms is actually able to produce a pretty convincing explanation because it knows which words were most likely to occur in that order based on Guy Carpenter's online glossary that fed part of its data training. So,
Yeah, and in many ways, as you said, it has its uses and its limitations. Yeah. When you're talking about data and the accuracy of what you're saying, like it needs to be correct, like 90% accurate or more. Otherwise, it's like we're just going to have rubbish.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because not only, I mean, even if the newer versions, you'll have like more up-to-date information it can draw upon, but like it doesn't know the news. right? It doesn't like this is it. Even if it could pull up to what happened just now, it doesn't know the thing that someone just told you over a phone call or at the pub about like these people are moving here. This is the change. Or like this thing is going to unravel, or this deal is getting done. Like news still needs to be created, like computer, like so. There's always going to be an element of it being a tool that helps facilitate simplifying complex language, or taking more generic. Like I'm just going to do the generic press release. Like give me those blurbs because I'm not going to like. It'll take me 8 minutes to write it, but I can do it in 3 seconds. So there's tedium that will go away, but like discovery of stories, net new creation, all of that needs to exist and be created still.
I totally agree. But actually, what I would say is even like your press release copy. Okay, we pride ourselves on what we call alpha content, right? And that doesn't just mean exclusive news or analysis or comment or whatever. It means adding context. It means looking at the why does this matter? If someone hires A from B, what's the context of this? Why is that move being made? Does this have any wider significance? Does this signal something? Actually, if we look back at an interview from a year ago, wait, did this executive highlight this may happen? That's the context that I think matters, and that's I think the reader's value. But also it's something that ChatGPT or something like that simply can't do.
Exactly.
The reason why this is important is because
right.
It would be fun though to ask ChatGPT, what's the worst scandal in reinsurance this week, and just.
Hey.
No constraints, no guard, no walls, and just and just print it.
The risks.
You're getting sued for sure.
There's a potentially very interesting a comment or analysis in that, chaps. I mean,
I mean, as a spoof version, you get these sort of fake, parody news kind of sites. And so like ChatGPT could create its own of those with no effort, right? Like create for me the ultimate post-truth fake news reinsurance news website. And label it as such. I'm sure you get all sorts of hilarious stories.
Do you know what? I may give it a go and I'll feedback.
Let's circle back. We'll post the results.
Absolutely.
It's a super interesting space, and I think you're seeing technology blend into the space. And when we think about it, how it impacts our universe, it's in a very similar context going, we can help do these things more efficient, but like what it means and why it's there and what it's sort of insinuating or pointing towards in the future, those trends, like that still needs to be like understood by the reader. So whilst we can help do data faster, get deals done, all the things that, we build software for, it's like that's helpful for here's the thing, right? As you're saying, but what matters is between the lines. Somebody be able to read it and go, oh, this is signaling that thing, and this is the deeper context that exists here, and that's where the really interesting things lie. And as you said, it can't just be filled; it has to be something with understanding of the nuance that can jump in there.
I think speaking of interesting things, so I'm like many of our listeners, I'm sure, as ever, moments away from a client meeting, so I will have to run pretty soon. But I don't want to deprive our listeners of the opportunity to hear from you as a journalist who sees the big picture. What do you think are the most interesting stories, current or emerging, that people should be watching over the next, 6 months or so, or to a year? What's catching your eye right now?
Well, without sort of
spilling
publishing
the
news before it's out.
Exactly.
I mean, look, I think there are some big questions about sort of the longevity left in this sort of hard market, right? Have we reached peak hardness? I don't know if that's a phrase, but I've just there you go. So that's a question that is going to be on the lips of many people, particularly at Monte Carlo, and it's a question which I'm afraid we're not going to really know the answer to. We're sort of smack bang in hurricane season now, aren't we? So that's very interesting. The industry has still got to grapple with some pretty big issues. Okay, so I mean, what are they? Well, you've got cyber. We haven't yet got market consensus on what is our attitude towards this, despite efforts. And there are some really exciting developments happening there. But like all these things, the proof will be in the pudding, right? We'll see what comes out of them. Climate change is another. We do have to wrestle with what we're going to do from the fallout of the NZIA. And also we've got to really make some solid commitments. I think, people are investors, particularly looking at us to sort of take some lead on this. Thirdly, it's market modernization. Okay, I think we've been talking about this for years, and progress has been made, and I think that's really important to stress. But we've still got a long way to go.
Yeah.
And I think we've got to understand that. And I think finally, we talk about data, we talk about AI, we talk about all these things. It's all useless unless we can find ways of data is pointless unless we can find ways of utilizing it and reading it and analyzing it, right? AI might make a claim go faster, but actually, can we, how are we actually going to utilize it to make the industry more profitable? How are we going to generate better combined ratios? Things which really matter to the investors, to capacity, to capital. That's an interesting dynamic, which once again we haven't really wrestled with yet.
Yeah. I mean, if that's not a glowing endorsement for why you should subscribe to the Insurer, like, I don't know a better one.
Hey.
Ryan, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.